Four men surrounded a black woman in a wealthy suburb, smirking as they closed in. They didn't see me. More importantly, they didn't see the two Belgian Malinois at my side, waiting for a single, silent command. The late afternoon sun bled gold across Oak Creek Estates, a neighborhood engineered for tranquility. The light was sharp, slicing across lawns so perfect they looked like CGI, painting long, distorted shadows that clung to the pristine stucco walls. This was a place of manicured silence, where the whisper of automated sprinklers was the loudest sound and every mailbox stood at perfect attention. But at 45, Dr. Aris Thorne had learned that the most immaculate surfaces often concealed the deepest rot. A former veterinarian surgeon for a Tier 1 Special Operations Unit, she understood that true peace was never this quiet. Quiet was a mask. She walked with a gait that years of expensive civilian life couldn't erase, a fluid, ground-eating pace honed by years in combat boots. Her high-end hiking pants and moisture-wicking quarter-zip were a civilian's uniform, but they couldn't hide the coiled readiness in her shoulders. At her sides, moving with a liquid grace that was almost unnerving, were Nyx and Erebus. They were Belgian Malinois, lean and dark as midnight, their muscles shifting like oiled machinery beneath their coats. They didn't need the slack leashes she held. Their connection to her was something deeper than leather and steel. It was a current of unspoken commands, of shared history written in the dust of forgotten war zones. Nyx, her head low, scanned the left flank. Erebus, his gaze fixed forward, tracked the right. They moved as one organism, three bodies sharing a single, vigilant mind. For 3 months, this had been their routine. The rental house at the end of the cul-de-sac was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place to decompress from a world of sand and screams. But Oak Creek Estates offered no welcome. Curtains twitched as she passed. A phone would angle behind a blind to capture a photo. No one waved. No one asked about the dogs. They simply watched, their silence a form of judgment. Aris didn't care. She wasn't here for acceptance. She was here for the quiet she had earned. Today, however, the quiet felt different. It was a taut, predatory stillness that made the hairs on her arms stand up. The dogs felt it, too. Nyx's ears, usually relaxed, swiveled forward, locking onto a point beyond the curve of the manicured hedge. Erebus's entire body went rigid, a low, almost inaudible rumble vibrating in his chest. Then she heard it. Voices. Male, laced with the casual, arrogant humor of men who had never been told no. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight of smug ownership, the sound of predators marking their territory. It came from just ahead. Aris slowed, her weight shifting to the balls of her feet. She gave a silent hand signal, a subtle flex of her fingers against her thigh. Like smoke, Nyx peeled off to the left, melting into the deep shadows of an ornamental oak. Erebus swept right, his paws making no sound on the perfectly paved sidewalk. They vanished from sight, but not from range. She rounded the hedge. There they were. 4 of them, radiating a contemptuous confidence. They formed a loose, predatory semicircle around a young black woman who stood frozen by a late-model sedan. The woman, maybe in her late 20s, was dressed in the sharp, practical attire of a professional, Jenna Williams, an urban planner Aris had seen once at a community meeting. She was holding a tablet to her chest like a shield, her knuckles white. The men wore a uniform of their own, worn work boots, faded jeans, and shirts with the logos of local businesses. Their leader, a man with a beefy neck and pale, watchful eyes, was Caleb Rusk. Aris recognized him from the Patriot Heritage flyers that occasionally littered her driveway. He leaned forward, his voice a slick ooze of mock concern. "Just taking some pictures, little lady?" "Casing the neighborhood?" he asked, a smirk playing on his lips. Another laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Probably lost. These types always get lost when they wander off their own side of the tracks." Jenna's chin was high, but Aris could see the tremor in her hands. "I'm conducting a municipal survey for the city planning department," she said, her voice tight but clear. Rusk's smirk widened. He took a slow, deliberate step closer, invading her space. A survey? Or are you looking for a handout? Looking for trouble? His eyes roamed over her, stripping her of her professionalism, her humanity, reducing her to an object of his derision. Aris stepped forward. She didn't shout. She didn't announce herself. She simply let her presence fill the space, her shadow falling over the manicured lawn. The four men turned, their smirks faltering as they took in her coiled stance, her unblinking gaze. Then their eyes dropped to the empty space at her sides, a space that suddenly felt charged with unseen threat. "She has every right to be here," Aris said. Her voice was calm, flat, and devoid of emotion. It was the voice she used to suture a wound under fire. "You need to leave. Now." Rusk's eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine anger replacing the performative smugness. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her dark skin. "Well, look what we have here. Another one. You folks have a club?" He took a half-step toward Aris, his hand dropping casually to his hip. "This is a private community. We look out for our own. And you're not our own." He gestured to one of his men. The man, wiry and with a knife clipped to his pocket, stepped toward Jenna, reaching out as if to snatch the tablet from her hands. "I think we'll take a look at that survey." That was the line. "Don't," Aris commanded. The word was cold steel. The man paused, looking back at Rusk, who simply nodded. It was permission. It was a promise of impunity. The man's hand shot forward. The air didn't just crackle, it split open. As the man's fingers brushed Jenna's tablet, Aris didn't speak a name. She didn't have to. A specific, two-tone whistle, barely audible to human ears, left her lips. From the shadows to the right, Erebus exploded into motion. He was not a pet, he was a weapon system. He moved with the ballistic precision of a guided missile, his target not the man, but the man's center of gravity. He hit the attacker's legs from the side, a 70-pound blur of focused kinetic energy. The man's feet were swept from under him as if by a phantom wave. He hit the pavement with a sickening, hollow thud, the air driven from his lungs in a choked gasp. Before he could even process the fall, Erebus stood over him, jaws open inches from his face, a growl thundering from his chest that was pure, controlled menace. There was no biting. None was needed. The threat was absolute. The other three were frozen for a split second, their brains struggling to reconcile the idyllic suburban scene with the sudden, shocking violence. That second was all Aris needed. The second man, bigger and slower, recovered first, bellowing with rage as he charged her. He swung a clumsy, powerful fist aimed at her head. Aris didn't retreat. She flowed under the arc of the punch, her body a study in fluid mechanics. As his arm passed over her shoulder, she pivoted, driving her elbow into the soft, unprotected space of his floating ribs. A sharp, wet crack echoed in the quiet air. The man's roar turned into a strangled gurgle. He stumbled, clutching his side, his face a mask of agony and disbelief. Aris didn't pause. She hooked a leg behind his, twisted, and sent him crashing into the perfectly trimmed hedges, where he lay groaning, trying to draw a breath that wouldn't come. Jenna Williams stood against the car, her tablet now held tight, her knuckles bone white. Her eyes were wide, not just with fear, but with a dawning, stunned awe. She saw Aris move and understood she was witnessing something far beyond a simple street fight. Caleb Rusk and his remaining man now stood together, their smug confidence shattered and replaced by a venomous fury. The third man pulled the knife from his pocket, its blade glinting in the dying sun. "You crazy bitch," he snarled, lunging forward in a wild, slashing motion. This time, the silent command was a subtle shift in Aris's weight, a dip of her chin. Nyx materialized from the left. She met the charge not with a frontal assault, but with a flanking maneuver taught in the most elite K9 units. She didn't go for the knife hand. She went for the offhand, clamping her jaws onto the man's bicep with calibrated pressure, enough to ignite every nerve ending, not enough to tear flesh. The man screamed, his momentum broken, his focus shattered. In that instant of distraction, Aris stepped in. Her hand chopped down on his wrist, the ulnar nerve strike causing his fingers to go numb and release the knife. It clattered onto the pristine asphalt. She didn't stop. A palm heel strike to his chin snapped his head back, and a brutal, disabling kick to the side of his knee buckled his leg. He collapsed in a heap, clutching his now useless arm. Now, only Caleb Rusk was left. He stood amidst the wreckage of his crew, the groaning bodies scattered across the manicured lawn like obscene litter. His face was pale, his breathing ragged. The mask of the folksy community leader was gone, revealing the raw, hateful core beneath. He reached behind his back and pulled out a collapsible steel baton, flicking it open with a sharp snap. "I'll kill you," he breathed, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. "And I'll kill your damn dogs." Aris met his gaze, her own expression unreadable. She took one step back, creating space. She gave a low, quiet command, this time a single word. "Heal." Instantly, Nyx and Erebus disengaged from their targets. They moved back to her sides, settling into perfect position, their bodies tense but utterly disciplined. They were no longer attacking, they were guarding, a living wall of teeth and muscle. The wail of sirens grew louder, no longer a distant annoyance but a fast-approaching reality. Rusk hesitated, his eyes flicking from Aris to the approaching sound. He knew his window was closing. Aris saw the calculation in his eyes. She took a deep breath and spoke to Jenna, her voice still unnervingly calm. "Get your phone. Record everything, starting now." The command cut through Jenna's shock, giving her purpose. Her trembling fingers fumbled with her phone, the red dot of the recording blinking to life just as the first police cruiser screamed around the corner. 2 cruisers from the Oak Creek Sheriff's Department slid to a stop, their blue and red lights painting chaotic, flashing strokes across the bloodless violence of the scene. Doors flew open and 2 officers emerged, their hands on their holstered weapons, their faces tight with practiced suspicion. The first was a young officer, his eyes wide as he took in the 4 downed men and the lone black woman standing calmly with 2 formidable dogs at her sides. The second officer, however, moved with a different kind of energy. Sergeant Kyler Vance stepped out of his vehicle with the unhurried swagger of a man who owned the ground he walked on. His hair was slicked back, a gold watch glinted on his wrist, and a smug, easy smile was already fixed on his face. He didn't assess the scene, he judged it. His eyes swept past Jenna, past the groaning men, and landed squarely on Aris with a look of theatrical disappointment. Before Vance could speak, Caleb Rusk seized the narrative. "Thank God you're here, Kyler," he cried, his voice filled with manufactured panic. He pointed a shaking finger at Aris. "She just attacked us. Out of nowhere. We were just asking this other woman if she needed directions, and this one came charging out of the bushes like a damn animal and set her dogs on us." The man with the bruised ribs chimed in, wheezing. "She's insane. Look what she did to us. We were just trying to be good neighbors." Jenna stepped forward, her phone still recording. "That is a lie," she said, her voice shaking but furious. "They were harassing me. They cornered me, threatened me. She saved me." Sergeant Vance held up a hand, silencing her with a dismissive gesture. "Ma'am, we'll get your statement in a minute. Just calm down." He never once made eye contact with her. His focus was entirely on Aris. He walked toward her, his boots making soft, authoritative sounds on the pavement. He stopped a few feet away, his smile gone, replaced by a look of grave concern that was utterly false. "Dr. Thorne, isn't it?" he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "We've had some calls about you and your pets. Seems like you've got a bit of an anger problem." The young officer, Ben Carter, looked on, a knot tightening in his stomach. He saw the way Vance ignored Jenna. He saw the immediate familiarity between Vance and Rusk. He saw the narrative being written in real time, and it didn't match the evidence before his eyes. His hand instinctively moved, his thumb brushing the body camera on his chest, ensuring it was active. "They were assaulting a citizen," Sergeant Aris stated, her voice level. "My actions were defensive and proportionate to the threat." "Proportionate?" Vance scoffed, gesturing to the men on the ground. "This looks proportionate to you? For upstanding members of the community are injured, and you and your attack dogs don't have a scratch on you." He turned to Carter. "Cuff her." Carter hesitated. "Sergeant, maybe we should." "That's an order, officer," Vance snapped, his voice losing its friendly veneer. Aris didn't resist. She gave a soft, two-word command to her dogs. "Down. Stay." Nyx and Erebus instantly dropped to a prone position, their eyes never leaving her face. She turned, presenting her wrists. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around them, a chillingly final sound in the manicured quiet. "You can't do this," Jenna cried, stepping forward again. "I have it all on video." Vance barely glanced at her. "We'll take your phone as evidence. Now step back, ma'am, before I charge you with interfering." He then nodded to the other officer. "Call animal control. Get these animals secured. They're clearly a public menace." The sight of the animal control van arriving was a sharper pain than any punch. Aris watched, her expression a mask of granite, as a handler approached Nyx and Erebus with a catchpole. The dogs remained disciplined, but as they were led away, Nyx turned her head, her dark, intelligent eyes locking with Aris's. It wasn't a look of fear, but of profound, questioning sorrow. It was the look of a soldier betrayed by the very people they were trained to protect. The doors of the van slammed shut, and a piece of Aris's soul went with them. In the sterile, antiseptic-smelling processing room, the humiliation was methodical. Fingerprints. Mugshots. The confiscation of her property. Through it all, Aris remained silent, her stillness a form of resistance. As she sat on the cold steel bench of a holding cell, the iron door clanging shut, she closed her eyes. She wasn't in Oak Creek anymore. She was back in Kandahar, the air thick with dust and the smell of cordite, the weight of her body armor a familiar comfort. She had faced down armed insurgents, navigated minefields, performed surgery in the back of a shaking Humvee. That was danger. This was something else. This was a sickness, a rot that wore a badge and a smile. And as the lock clicked home, she didn't feel despair. She felt a cold, clarifying focus. The system hadn't just failed. It had declared war on her. And Aris Thorne had never, ever lost a war. The clank of the cell door unlocking hours later was the first sound that broke Aris's meditative calm. Jenna Williams stood in the corridor, her face pale but her eyes burning with a fierce, protective light. A public defender she'd found on an emergency list stood beside her, looking harried. "I posted your bail," Jenna said, her voice low but steady. "They were trying to hold you for 48 hours without cause." Aris rose, the stiffness in her muscles a dull reminder of the fight. She nodded once to Jenna, a silent acknowledgement that went deeper than words. "Thank you." Their first stop wasn't home. It was the county animal control facility, a squat, cinderblock building that smelled of disinfectant and despair. The clerk at the desk was unhelpful, citing a police hold and aggression protocols. Aris didn't raise her voice. She calmly quoted the state statutes regarding the seizure of private property and the specific legal requirements for a veterinarian to assess a service animal in training before it could be declared dangerous. Her knowledge was precise, her tone unyielding. A flustered supervisor was called. 15 minutes later, the hold was lifted. The reunion was a quiet explosion of relief. They brought Erebus out first. He walked out, saw her, and his entire body went taut for a second before he rushed to her side, pressing his head hard against her leg. Then came Nyx. She sat directly in front of Aris, let out a single, soft whine, and waited. Aris knelt, burying her face in the thick fur of Nyx's neck, and for the first time that day, allowed herself a single, deep, steadying breath. Her soldiers were back. The real work could begin. Back at the rental house, the alliance was forged over cups of strong, black coffee. "They're trying to bury this," Jenna said, pacing the living room. "My video. They accidentally wiped the file during evidence processing. The police report claims you were the aggressor and I was a confused bystander. They're building a fortress of lies. Then we'll dismantle it, brick by brick," Aris replied. Her voice was quiet, but it held the weight of absolute conviction. Jenna stopped pacing, her urban planner's mind kicking into gear. "I can help. I'm good at research. Property records, business licenses, campaign contributions, it's all public data, if you know where to look. I can map Rusk's network." Aris looked at her, a flicker of appreciation in her eyes. "Good. You handle the data. I'll handle the groundwork." That night, the house transformed. Aris's living room became a command center. While Jenna's fingers flew across her laptop, pulling up a web of LLCs and shell corporations all linked to Caleb Rusk, Aris opened a hardened Pelican case that had remained untouched since her discharge. Inside wasn't memorabilia, it was hardware. An encrypted satellite phone, a set of high-powered binoculars with a built-in rangefinder, and a small, unassuming black box. Her first call was to a number that didn't exist in any public directory. A gruff voice answered on the second ring. "Thorne. It's been a while. I need a backgrounder, Marcus," Aris said, "no pleasantries needed. Caleb Rusk, Oak Creek County. Runs a front called Patriot Heritage. Give me everything you've got." While she waited, Aris assembled the black box. It was a compact, commercial drone, modified for silent flight and fitted with a high-resolution thermal imaging camera. This was her eye in the sky. Marcus called back within the hour. The picture he painted was darker than Aris had imagined. Rusk wasn't just a local bigot, he was a node in a much larger network of extremist militias. He used the landscaping and security companies Jenna had found to launder money and recruit. The Patriot Heritage group was his radicalization pipeline. The report ended with a chilling detail, a location flagged as Rusk's primary base of operations. An abandoned industrial poultry farm on the outskirts of the county. That night, as Jenna slept fitfully on the couch, Aris drove. She parked her nondescript sedan a mile away and made her way through the dark woods on foot. She launched the drone from a clearing, its rotors making less noise than the wind in the pines. On the screen of her controller, the poultry farm came into view. The thermal camera cut through the darkness, painting the world in shades of heat and cold. She saw the main building, several large, long sheds, and a perimeter fence. And she saw heat signatures. 4 guards patrolling the perimeter. More than a dozen figures clustered inside one of the main sheds. This wasn't a clubhouse. It was a barracks. She watched them for 2 hours, mapping their patrol routes, identifying blind spots in their coverage, noting the location of their power generator. Her mind, trained for surgical strikes, began to formulate a plan. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about excision. She was a surgeon, and she had just located the tumor. While Aris planned her infiltration, Officer Ben Carter was fighting his own war inside the sheriff's department. The official report on the Oak Creek disturbance was a masterclass in fiction, signed off by Sergeant Vance himself. Carter knew that questioning it directly would get him buried in paperwork and endless shift changes. He needed leverage. He started digging, not into the case, but into Vance. He spent his off-duty hours combing through old dispatch logs and internal affairs complaints, looking for a pattern. He found it in a name, Caleb Rusk. Over the past 5 years, at least 6 different assault or intimidation complaints have been filed against Rusk or his known associates. Every single one had been dismissed for lack of evidence or uncooperative witnesses. And the supervising officer who signed off on every dismissal was Kyler Vance. The connection wasn't just a friendship, it was a conspiracy of protection. Jenna, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of focused, digital fury. Her planning skills translated perfectly to investigative research. She followed the trail of Rusk's shell companies and discovered they all paid exorbitant security consultation fees to a single firm. The firm was owned by Sergeant Vance's brother-in-law. Then she found the keystone. The abandoned poultry farm wasn't just Rusk's hideout. It had been sold to one of his empty LLCs 2 years ago in a foreclosure auction, and the county official who approved the below-market value sale was now a high-ranking member of the mayor's staff. The rot went all the way to the top. They coordinated through encrypted messaging apps, a 3-person intelligence cell operating in the shadows. Carter provided the internal intel. Jenna provided the public-facing data. Aris provided the direct action. The night of the infiltration was moonless and cold. Dressed in dark, non-reflective gear, Aris moved through the woods surrounding the poultry farm like a ghost. Nyx and Erebus were with her, their movements as silent as her own. They were her early warning system, her perimeter defense. She left them at the edge of the tree line with a silent command to hold and watch. She cut through a section of the chain-link fence in a known blind spot she'd identified with the drone. The air inside the compound was thick with the smell of rust, diesel, and the faint, lingering odor of animal decay. She moved with an economy of motion, her path pre-planned, her senses alive. She slipped into a darkened maintenance shed, the metallic taste of adrenaline sharp in her mouth. Through a grimy window, she could see the main barracks shed. The windows were lit, and she could hear the rough laughter and loud, boastful voices of Rusk's men. This was the moment. She pulled a small, custom-built device from her pack. It wasn't a weapon, but a tool of misdirection. She activated it and tossed it near the farm's main power generator. 30 seconds later, it emitted a high-frequency pulse that caused the generator to sputter and die. The lights in the barracks went out. Shouts of confusion and anger erupted. Several men stumbled outside, flashlights cutting wildly through the darkness. This was her window. Under the cover of the chaos, Aris slipped out of the shed and crossed the open ground to the barracks. The side door was unlocked. She entered a small, cluttered office. The main room was now full of men trying to get the lights back on. She ignored them. Her target was the computer on the desk. She plugged a small USB drive into its port. A progress bar appeared on the drive's tiny screen, data being copied at lightning speed, financial records, membership lists, encrypted chat logs. While it copied, her eyes scanned the room. On a corkboard was a map of the county, marked with red pins. She recognized some of the locations as the homes of minority families who had recently moved into the area. It was a map of intimidation targets. This was proof of a coordinated hate campaign. She took out her phone and photographed everything. The USB drive beeped. The copy was complete. As she pulled it out, she heard Rusk's voice, barking orders to get the backup generator running. Her time was up. She slipped back out the side door, but before she left the compound, she had one last task. Near the front gate, she placed a small, magnetic GPS tracker on the undercarriage of Rusk's oversized pickup truck. She melted back into the woods, reuniting with Nyx and Erebus. As she faded into the darkness, the lights of the farm flickered back on, illuminating a scene of angry, confused men who had no idea they had just been surgically compromised. They had lost everything and didn't even know it yet. The surgeon had removed the tumor, and now, it was time to show it to the world. The data from Aris's raid was a bombshell. It contained everything: the coded ledgers detailing payments to Vance, the roster of the militia, and chat logs where they bragged in sickening detail about their harassment campaigns, including the assault on Jenna. There was even a file referencing their plan to deal with the new veterinarian problem. Aris compiled it all into a single, encrypted file. She sent one copy to Jenna and Carter. She sent another, set on a 36-hour dead man switch, to a trusted investigative journalist she knew from her time in the service. If she went dark, the story would go public. The final phase required a lure. Using the GPS tracker, Aris watched as Rusk and a core group of his men drove to a new location, a secluded hunting cabin deep in the state forest, far from their compromised base. They were spooked, running to ground. This was the trap. Aris forwarded the location to Carter, who, knowing he couldn't trust his own department, made a choice. He walked into the state police barracks and laid out a portion of the evidence, enough to prove a credible threat and conspiracy involving a local sheriff's sergeant. He requested a discreet surveillance team. The final confrontation was not a raid, but a controlled demolition. Aris didn't go in with guns blazing. She used the terrain. On the night of the meeting, she and her dogs moved through the woods around the cabin. They didn't attack. They created a perimeter of psychological pressure. A snapped twig here. A low, rumbling growl from the darkness there. The flicker of a shadow just at the edge of the firelight. The men, already paranoid, started to unravel. Accusations flew. A drunken fight broke out. When the state police tactical team finally moved in, they didn't find a hardened militia, they found a disorganized, terrified mob that surrendered without a single shot fired. The aftermath was a swift and brutal cleansing. With the evidence Aris provided, federal hate crime charges were filed against Rusk and his entire crew. Sergeant Kyler Vance was arrested in his office by FBI agents, his smug expression finally crumbling as the cuffs closed around his wrists. The mayor, implicated by the land deal, resigned in disgrace. Officer Ben Carter, the internal whistleblower, was temporarily placed on leave but lauded by state investigators for his integrity. The reckoning was public. The investigative journalist released the full story, and Operation White Veil, as he called it, became a national headline. The quiet, idyllic town of Oak Creek was forced to look at the ugly truth it had allowed to fester in its perfect lawns and silent streets. A few months later, the dust had begun to settle. Aris stood in a grassy field that had once been part of the abandoned poultry farm. The derelict sheds were gone, replaced by training agility courses and open space. Beside her stood Jenna Williams. Together, they had founded The Watcher's Paw, a non-profit that rescued and retrained retired military and police K-9s, pairing them with community watch groups in neighborhoods vulnerable to systemic violence and intimidation. Nyx and Erebus, their ambassadors, sat at her feet, watching as a group of local volunteers learned how to read a dog's body language. Officer Carter, now a detective with the state police, was their chief advisor. They were building something new from the ashes of the old rot. One evening, Aris was walking Nyx and Erebus down the same street where it all began. The houses were the same, the lawns just as perfect. But something had shifted. A white neighbor, a man who had once peered at her from behind his curtains, was out tending his rose bushes. As she approached, he looked up. He straightened his back, wiped his hands on his pants, and gave a small, deliberate nod. It wasn't effusive. It wasn't an apology. It was a simple, quiet acknowledgement. A flicker of respect. Aris nodded back, her expression calm. She kept walking, her two dark guardians at her side, their steps silent and sure on the pavement. The silence of Oak Creek no longer felt like a threat. It was just quiet. And for the first time, it felt like peace. Silence is the soil where hatred grows, but it shatters when one person decides to act. Have you ever witnessed a moment where silence was broken and things started to change? Share your story in the comments below. Please, always comment with respect. If you believe justice needs a voice, share this video with your friends, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story.